What's up, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for the 1004 show. It's episode 65, and we're talking with Nicola Corzine, the executive director at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center in San Francisco. And I'm Zack Miller, and I'm going to get to the heart of what really makes successful entrepreneurs and business community leaders tick. Hang on for this non-scripted deep dive on how people succeed. Whether you're a company starter or a community builder, learn from the best on the 1004 show. I'm excited about this episode because Nicola and I talk a lot about different elements that people are hot topics but don't really know how to fix it. We're talking about inclusiveness in business and in business communities, among other things, and the emotional side of entrepreneurship in ways that entrepreneurs and people that are helping entrepreneurs can actually help out. I love this episode, and I think you will too. We deep dive on some really, really important topics, so check it out. Episode 65, Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center in San Francisco. Nicola Corzine, take it away. You are the founding executive director of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. How does it feel to not only be the executive director, but to be the founding director of something so powerful as your organization?
Oh, thank you. It's inspirational, I think, daily to sort of be in this role. And I started out the journey on the other side of the fence as an entrepreneur myself, and then switched gears into investment for many, many years. And I didn't realize how much I missed building things and how much I was sort of leaning in through the investor lens of learning a lot day in and day out from entrepreneurs, but never being able to make a difference in a meaningful and sustainable way to empower a change in entrepreneurship until I had this opportunity. So it really was a great convergence for me. And I realized I had one more startup of startups myself to be able to get behind and really enjoy bringing to market the way that we have over the last couple of years.
You say that now, I can see a couple more companies coming out of you. I think one of the biggest challenges with systems, centers, places that are a platform for entrepreneurs to grow, whether physical, remote, whatever, is they're led by someone who doesn't understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And I have seen dozens, hundreds of spaces that are led by people who are really nice people. But the people that are supposed to listen to them can't actually relate to them. They can't actually trust them in that same kind of way. What have you seen that's been so important for you as your kind of previous role as actually owning a business to the now having people look at you and be the leader of the center there?
No, thanks. It's definitely I hear where you're kind of coming from on that equation. There's a couple of things that we committed to doing really differently from day one when we built this space.
Okay.
And first and foremost was saying we are not experts in what you need as entrepreneurs. Um, the reason and the drive for doing what we do day in and day out really comes from this understanding, but very deeply connected for me personally, that entrepreneurship is an incredibly lonely journey and it's an incredibly hard journey. And ironically, as you get more and more successful, those two scenarios continue to be ever present. In fact, some might argue even more so. Um, you are being judged by stakeholders that range from your personal family and all that you're asking them to get behind with your belief that you're building and bringing something of value to the world, to the investors that are saying, well, last quarter you said you were going to do this and I don't care about the 35 other things that got in the way of realizing that, but why did you not make it? And so that pressure, that constant pressure valve, is always on for founders in a way that is not true in any other field in this world. And yet, when it works well, it can be an amazing engagement. And so, what we said is founders need a place that is hyper focused on them individually, that no two founders are going through the same set of challenges, but that each of them needs a safety net where they can be real, they can be authentic, they can say, I have challenges that I haven't figured it out, and no one is judging them. So we wanted to create an environment that was really focused on solving business challenges for our founders, first and foremost, through the lens of what was keeping them up at night, not through a prescriptive mechanism that we somehow espoused was what they should be working on next. So it's a very different philosophy when you look at it through that equation, but it's been one that allowed us to grow from 0 entrepreneurs 2 years ago to over 8,100 that have been educated in the last 2 years. And that's an engagement where I'm really humbled to say almost half of those are female. So 49% of our founder base are women and 62% are minority entrepreneurs. We have entrepreneurs from every industry that is supporting entrepreneurs in high tech and low tech beside one another in this peer support engaging system. And a lot of people that obviously believe in that philosophical viewpoint that I've shared too.
We've been talking for 5 minutes. I have about 16 pages of notes to talk about. Entrepreneurship is lonely. I don't think people who have never been an entrepreneur get that. When you guys were developing what to do, and I love what you were saying about making sure that we're really solving their problems. How did you start developing a place that could actually solve those people, and then realizing that, okay, it doesn't have to physically be about the space either. We could be helping, almost 10,000 entrepreneurs in 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, it does start by saying that the curriculum approach of a lot of the amazing accelerators and incubators that exist out there, it requires several things. One, it says that entrepreneurs should and always must define success by a set of core metrics that look at venture backable or number of patents or kind of old school archaic KPIs that really don't matter for a lot of entrepreneurs. When you ask entrepreneurs, be they sort of fresh out of college or be they coming into it in their mid 40s, everyone has a different set of attributes as to why they're doing this and what they're ultimately looking for from a success perspective at the end of the day, and how you can physically connect with these entrepreneurs and engage them into being part of the solution instead of just being the ones that are learning from, like, this is how you build a perfect PowerPoint deck, suddenly takes a very different connotation, right? Because I can't change the access to capital. I wish I could. That's journey part 2. But today we're going to have to put on the side burner that not everybody should be venture backable. And if that's the case, then we've got a lot more responsibility into what does it mean to bring sustainable businesses to the market. And if you're building for sustainability, there's a whole different set of outcomes that you can start getting really fine-tuned with your entrepreneurs on, such that it doesn't matter if it's this business that works or 3 from now that work. The value of the education, of the support, of the understanding of how to be a successful entrepreneur can stay the course long after this particular business is around or not around, as the case may be. Does that help?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I do a webinar and also an in-person talk about some things that entrepreneurs should be looking for and investors are looking for in raising capital. And one of the first things I say is understand why you need that money. Understand if you need it because you're broke and you need someone to give you money to stay afloat, or if you actually are a venture-backed business. And oftentimes, probably 98% of the time, people think they need money because they just don't have it. And they actually just need sales. And so I love that approach. Tell me a little bit about Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. I know it came out of the Nasdaq Educational Center, the roots of that. What are your kind of big, crazy, audacious goals with it?
Yeah, I love it. So, the foundation from which we were born out of Nasdaq has had a long tenured legacy in really giving a lot to business plan competitions and to mentorship organizations and financial literacy programs across America. And in those moments of giving out a lot of money, as often happens, I think, to people on that side of the fence, the worry was we could be doing so much more. We have all of these people who also want to be available and supportive to entrepreneurs, and yet we're really not activating the intellectual capital side of the house. We're just activating the capital, the money side of the house. So how about we set up an organization who has its own mandate, its own mission and drive day in and day out to think about building the best and the brightest nonprofit for entrepreneurial development, and to really ensure that world-class resources and education are delivered to every entrepreneur across the globe. And that's all they're thinking through because that's their primary business. So that's exactly what they allowed us to do. So coming from that history and that legacy, when we look at ultimately where success might be for the center, there's a couple of things that we see as missing gaps. And this is our big, hairy, audacious goal for sure. I would say this. Um, to me, as the market has moved ever more into a globalization movement around entrepreneurship, there are a lot of disconnects right now between Silicon Valley expecting to sort of be the place that all can be realized and all is understood in entrepreneurship, and seeing that there are emerging markets of innovation that we're really not understanding what the drivers and the forces of success are happening in these new markets. And in fact, in some instances, potentially could propel and outperform Silicon Valley at one stage in the future. Given that our entrepreneurs are in the business of being global entrepreneurs, how do we connect real-time resource deployment such that we're able to make better informed policy decisions, better informed capital allocation decisions, better informed fund formations based on where the talent actually lives? In a market that usually takes 12 to 14 years to develop and know whether or not an exit has occurred that makes it likely for VC money to flow to an area, we have to shift things on the head. And I think in the world of big data and Hadoop, there's really no reason that we can't start applying a data-driven approach to understanding talent and innovation on a very different scale. If you do that, then you can actually start leveling the playing field when it comes to capital conversations. So I said I'd come back to the access to capital drive. Once upon a time, I was part of the original Startup America movement, and this was the idea, the concept that was driven by the White House, beautiful philosophically, that you could take Silicon Valley and replicate it across the United States. In that process, the only thing we learned is that you cannot take Silicon Valley and replicate it across the United States for a lot of reasons, because you were trying to force capital to go to markets absent really compelling reasons for knowing that that was a good market for capital to go to. In this case, we flip that on the head and we say the talent is there. There are key markers. There are key indicators. Understanding where entrepreneurship is really being successful and getting capital to those markets should not be a challenge once you can prove that the talent is really there. So focusing in on the talent drive and that talent approach is really what we want to do. Given that our entrepreneurs and the volume of the community that we're growing has a chance to really expand, already we've touched 68 countries. I anticipate that over the coming couple of years, we'll be at a scale of over 200,000 entrepreneurs worldwide, which I might add is only 0.5% of all entrepreneurs in the entire globe. We should be able to get to a volume of data that allows us to better understand where real pockets of innovation are happening and what policy really could and could not mean when you start making changes in those areas. And I know that was a lot to take in, but sort of from the broader scheme of things, I think you would approach capital in both the scientific fashion that's missing today, and you stop looking at data sets that are a year or 2 years old as being relevant in a field that never stands still on a good day.
Powerful. I once upon a time was also involved with Startup America. Was one of the Startup Virginia champions. Was sad when that whole thing kind of went away way back yonder. Yeah. I appreciate that you guys are seeing 49% women and minorities in your group. What are some of the things that you're doing that have worked and haven't worked to strategically encourage women and minorities to, get into entrepreneurship?
This whole concept around inclusive entrepreneurship, especially in Silicon Valley, is something that has been and will continue to be, a mindful practice for us. I would love to say that out the gate we somehow had a formula that we just knew was going to work, but I'd be absolutely lying to you if I told you that that was anything of the case. I think all I can do now is sort of share what did we learn and why has it kind of continued to outperform a lot of other accelerator and incubators and VCs that are trying to really drive up inclusivity when it comes to entrepreneurship. And that's really taking kind of our differentiation to a different level. So, for example, entrepreneurs are welcomed into the center based on a founder level. So we don't accept businesses, we accept individuals. That changes the application process. That changes the questions that we ask around what drives you, how do you personally define success. We don't make assessments as to whether or not you're quote unquote venture backable or you're at a certain stage before you get the help. So we found a whole lot more applications that are coming in of a more equal caliber, largely because people felt that they were entitled or able to apply when we asked them, when we surveyed them after the fact.
So is that like your standard like white collar service providers that are just providing a service, so like a lawyer or an accountant or something like that, can't come in there if they're just looking for space
Yeah.
in that kind of way?
Yeah, exactly. So for us, our basic principle is we'll invite any full-time entrepreneur into the center to receive free education, free mentorship, and free resources. If you fill out the application, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also give us 2 references. And a reference to us is somebody you've already convinced as an entrepreneur to give up time, to give up talent, or to give up energy. If you've done a great job as a salesperson in convincing 2 other people to believe in your power as an entrepreneur, that's all we need. So we really democratize that process of allowing people in. The second thing that we do from a diversity perspective that's been called out by our community as meaningful is that we don't sort of graduate people in a finite period of time. So you're welcome to stay as part of the supported ecosystem for the longitudinal development of yourself as an entrepreneur. The only thing we expect is you need to be working on a current challenge and allowing us to help you overcome that challenge. So it becomes a very engaging environment. There are teachers within the community. Once they've resolved a pain point, they're expected to pay it forward and share that information to the others that are going through those challenges. And they're also expected to be able to take this back to their broader community and support the community at home. And the third thing that we do is we have a very interdisciplinary approach to entrepreneurship. As I said at the beginning, we're not just about tech, we're about consumer, we're about services. All of these things meshing together has tended to bring in a lot different perspectives and a lot more different types of entrepreneurs, including gender and ethnicity in that equation. And then once we started seeing this being true in the community, I will say that the curriculum team here did a phenomenal job of saying we now have a responsibility for reverse pattern matching to be reflected on stage. So as much as a diverse audience was present, we also then intentionally said we need a diverse faculty that's teaching in a more professional environment, mentors that can also be reflective and representative of the same community, and really holding ourselves accountable to pushing the envelope, not taking the easy way out, and making sure 49% of our teaching community were also women and minorities too.
No, I think that's incredible. I know oftentimes we'll hear people in the state of Virginia locally that talk about diversity being diverse, and then you look at the actual group of people that are on these boards, and you're like, that's not true. And so I appreciate that you guys are really focusing and trying to make it be as equal as possible. Is entrepreneurship dying?
No, I would say it's actually not. Now, interesting question though, because I think for some they feel it's harder to be an entrepreneur these days, and understanding where those principles are coming from and what the challenges really are. You know, my dad was an entrepreneur, and I was moved out to the States when I was little, and I didn't appreciate how much having that exposure of entrepreneurship really could be from a DNA ingrading perspective to allow me to start my first company when I was in college. But for so many of our kids across America and for so many kids across the globe, they've never had that exposure, and they've never been encouraged to be able to see through that lens. And that I do feel is a disconnect. And I do worry that generationally we are not encouraging and fostering a spirit of innovation that's entitled for all. It has become a little bit of the elite get to call themselves entrepreneurs. And again, I think especially when you look through the aristocracy in part that's pervade here in Silicon Valley, and I as guilty as many for this, of like, well, are you venture backable, or did you raise, how much money have you raised, or what's your patent profile, and oh, you're not tech, so you're not really in this upper quad Gartner approach to entrepreneurship, not to point or unfairly at anything Gartner has done because they're great. But, I do think that we're our own worst enemies when it comes to how non-inclusive entrepreneurship has become, and how limited we see the unicorn potentials as being those that are entitled to wear this crown of entrepreneurship. And that needs to change. It needs to change for the sake of innovation. It needs to change for, honestly, the future of work, for job creation, and for making culture and society sustainable at the end of the day. We can't do that without entrepreneurs. But that comes in a K-12 environment as much as sort of entrepreneurship later in life. And there's a lot that's being done in sort of siloed groups. You made a very smart point, a great point before we even started this call of there's so much activity that happens in silos around this sector, and there's not enough unification when it comes to really ensuring that there's a pass the baton mechanism for supporting a whole culture of entrepreneurial development.
That is really a cycle or a wheel, if you will, where you make it, you lose, and
Yeah.
you cycle it back through. From a people perspective, to that point, I think it's oftentimes people look at something so short-sighted and they can't see how something can get really big. In a previous episode, we interviewed Nick Friedman, who has a company called College Hunks Moving Junk. And when he started it out of school, people joked him and his co-founder. Now they are, I think, $100 million a year business and one of the top franchises. And people, I think we decide very quickly if we think something can be successful or not, and not allow it to actually evolve. In the same kind of respect, I feel like we've done that from an entrepreneurship perspective and a parenting perspective. I don't have kids, but I see this with the founders that we've had with kids, and we're not allowing them and teaching them, hey, like, this is the route that you can go. There isn't this option. So my organization, Hatch, has been trying to work with middle school, high school kids and say, hey, look, go to college if you want.
Right.
But you can be building something right now, and actually you could be potentially making enough money to pay for college if you can't. And so, but I think the biggest challenge in this is parents, though. And so they're still telling their kids, and maybe when I have kids, I'll do the same thing, but they're still saying, this is the path that you have to go by. You have to, do well in high school, go to college, go work for the man, and then retire 40 years later. Right. And so how do you start having that conversation? Because I think it seems like you agree with me with this, where if the kids are going to be the difference, how do we convince their parents that path can be so innovative and different than maybe it was for them?
Yeah, and that's such an important question, because I think it comes from a lot of the harsh realities of entrepreneurship, right? We look at the numbers, and now, even when I say entrepreneurship, I think of businesses that are started perhaps in the restaurant space, and how many struggle within the first few years, and rightfully so. Parents probably coming from an incredibly protective lens of, I just don't want my child to feel that sense of failure. I don't want them to go through that heartache of all their savings going to something that potentially could be so very risky, and probably a little bit of that lamentation holding back, not from a sense of confidence that their child could do better, but a sense of worry and a sense of fearfulness. So, most of the time, senses of fears and concerns can be addressed with better education and educational literacy. I think, again, we can do more to highlight case studies and organizations that can help to mitigate some of these issues, that can start talking about, in a more sustainable fashion, how small businesses, medium businesses, large scale enterprises can be successful at getting to market, what education and resources support can be accessible for students. I even think of the number of, not only MBA programs, but universities across America these days that offer something in entrepreneurship, right? A minor in entrepreneurship. And I wonder, from a practicality lens, what does that mean for so many of these universities when, again, they're still struggling with what does success look like for graduating students in this field? We need to do more to start connecting those dots, both for the parents that are sending their students through college, even coming out with that degree, as well as those that may choose not to go to college, but desire to bring something that they see needed to market, and calling that entrepreneurship and business opportunities.
It's almost that it's become a buzzword, so people want to do it, make sure that they're doing it, but they don't know what's really associated with it. I was a part of a university that was getting an entrepreneurship program off the ground, and one of the questions I asked very early on was, hey, what happens when a student quits because their company is doing well? And the answer was, we don't want to talk about that. And I said, well, that's kind of what you're trying to build, isn't it? Like, right. So it's interesting. How do you define entrepreneur?
That's such a great question. These days, I think an entrepreneur is somebody who desires to bring something unproven to market, and who sees things creatively through a lens that other people don't. It's a spirit of innovation. It's a culture of understanding customer pain, to use that quintessential word, in ways that are uniquely positioned by them. Um, and it's a real belief that an unstructured system of opportunity can work for them in ways that a structured situation doesn't. And I say unstructured because entrepreneurship is at its core a very difficult place to know if you're on a track and a trajectory that is quote unquote successful. You don't have 6 month sit downs where you're like, hey, just so you know, you outperformed what we expected this year. Great job. Here's a raise. Nobody is giving you that kind of feedback loop. And it takes a very different mindset to be able to be capable and to drive in that and to love that and to do it above all else and to continue to get up every day with 150 things present as sort of top of mind to be successful in, and still do that all the time. So to me, entrepreneurship is a mindset. It is about being driven in ways that a structured system at the end of the day can't provide.
Love it. Your dad was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
What did you learn from him being that? And then also, when did you realize that maybe starting a business was something that you could do and that you wanted to do?
So, what I learned, and I didn't appreciate at the time growing up as only,
We never
9
do. We never appreciate.
12-year-olds
We
can
never
do,
appreciate it.
is that entrepreneurship is a messy, messy land, and that what I had seen is the highs and lows of some days being amazing and everything coming together, and some days it all seemed like you had put down the wrong chip and nothing was going to go your way, was par for the course. And seeing my dad have that tenacity to continue to get up day after day, irrespective of what the previous day had yielded, to go do it again for the love and for the passion and for the thriving of that sector, really was pretty inspirational. Because when I had the hard knocks of going, wow, that was a really tough day. I didn't close that deal that I thought I was going to close. I didn't get anybody to sign up in the way that I thought they would. The tech is off. Any of these things. The variance of understanding, well, that's just the way it goes. Some days are better than others, is again an exposure level that I don't think we talk honestly and authentically enough about. It's hard for people to feel comfortable in that messy, messy situation unless you've been there and experienced it and know that that's just nature kind of being an entrepreneur. So I learned an appreciation of failure and not being afraid of that word. I learned an appreciation of the amount of work and the volatility of the field, and that was also par for the course. I learned to laugh, and even in the hardest of days, that who you were as a centered individual wasn't something that was up for risk or up for jeopardy in those moments, and that sense of humor has always kind of been in an inspirational lens that I've been able to take and carry forward in the toughest of days. And I've seen the highs and the lows. I've seen days when we were riding it very, very well, and then how quickly it could come tumbling down again, with outside and inside factors influencing that, and market shifts and all of those lenses. When I realized I was turning into entrepreneurship myself, was actually in a little bit of that soul searching. So, funny story, I had gone to university in England largely because I wanted to travel across Europe. And so I had used the guise of, I need to go back to tie to the roots to understand where I came from in England, and really had just every aspiration of traveling as much as I could throughout Europe. And when I called to get more money from my parents, my dad told me words that I'll never forget. And that was, well, if you'd like to travel around Europe, I suggest you get a job. And when I looked at the jobs that were out in the market, I found nothing that I was drawn to. It was only through looking at job rack after job rack after job rack that I was like, there's got to be more. I see things differently. I don't want to be in a limited factor where I can only apply a tiny bit of sort of the creative or the angst or the interest that I have. And so I started talking with a couple of buddies that I had in university around this, and we were like, wouldn't it be really neat if we could just start a company? And then it was like, well, what company would we start? And then one thing led to another, and it was right at the time that the telecom industry was going through a major shift in the UK, and GSM had taken off, and suddenly cell phones went from being a luxury good to being affordable for the masses. And while most people were focusing in on the consumer market, I saw an opportunity, and my other co-founder saw an opportunity to really say, imagine what this is going to do for businesses across Europe, and imagine how small businesses can now transact and do it in a faster, more expeditious fashion than ever before because of cell phones. So we managed to convince BT, which is no small feat, to allow us to have sort of a first mover advantage in selling into the SMB space in Europe, and one thing took off after another, and before you know it, we had a fairly successful business that was much better. And so, did I see myself as waking up one day and going, I'm an entrepreneur? No, but I think only by sort of trying on different opportunities for me to find a living did I say, I see things differently. I want to do things differently. I want to be a builder, and I'd love to do it with amazing people that can help me build successfully. And so that started that conversation.
Sounds like a lot of pieces in your life were leading towards that kind of on-off switch, and then it just happened. Volatility, tenacity, I love those two words. The emotional side of business, I also agree, is not talked a lot about. It's kind of frowned upon. But if you look at the numbers, the majority of people who start a business fail, don't do well. So what are some ways that you encourage the 8,100 plus and soon to be 200,000 plus businesses to go through some of the emotional sides that they have to go through?
Yeah, it has to start by having that authentic connection to why you're doing what you're doing, and to realizing that there are things that are outside of your control. Control is such an interesting word when it comes to entrepreneurship, because for so many they lean into entrepreneurial tendencies because there is that worry around control, whether they've been on the sidelines of unfortunately downturn markets where their jobs were eliminated, or a worry around whether or not that may be the case at some stage in the future, and ultimately have concerns around taking outside stakeholders and shareholders' money, and giving up quote unquote control. We tend to always hear about control being a fear factor for entrepreneurs. There are skeletons in the closet for all of us that can look back and say, I learned more from my failures than I did from my successes, and I will still lament that to the day. Successes are easy to wash away. They're the ones that you go, well, it could be just a factor of market timing. It could be a factor of so many things that were outside of my control. But in a failure moment, you can relive everything that you did. And my third startup was this way entirely. What I would do differently, I could speak to no end. I could give you hours and months of insights of things that I learned from that one that the previous two never taught me. Is it a badge of honor? I don't know. I think it's a painful reminder, as most things are in life, when they don't go the way that you hope, that you dreamed, that you aspired to. I believe that they've definitely come out on the other side, making it stronger. But I think you have to have a support system around you. Too many entrepreneurs are sort of in this business of trying to do it all by themselves without asking for help, without even knowing how to ask for help. And I think there's organizations like ours and yours and others that entrepreneurs have to know who to go to when it's too much for them, and to being able to ask for that support system when it's needed is really critical to being able to stay the course. Not to use the old proverb of it's a marathon, not a sprint, but everything in entrepreneurship is about staying the distance. Nobody wakes up and overnight they're a success. That's just BS.
What?
And I'll call it every day. So, given that, how are you training? It's no different of training a muscle for a marathon as it is training as an entrepreneur. You get better, and you're not going to figure it all out on day one. And if you did, people would be bored with this industry and there'd be no opportunity for it. So I say it's actually part of the culture and part of the thriving of the sector at large.
And I think that's something that a lot of people forget to do, is kind of reflect and look back and say, hey, look how far I've come.
Right.
And that's powerful. You mentioned the control aspect of it. Is it just because people are too afraid to, show their weaknesses? Or, what are you seeing with the control piece that's such a challenge for people?
It's we when you bring something to life, which essentially you are doing as an entrepreneur, it's your baby, right? Like that's why it's called this is your baby. This is your dream. This is why you give it 24/7, 365 attention in ways that probably nobody else in your life is getting. um, and so if you're doing that and somebody is judging that, that's a really tough spot to be in. I'm not sure that any of us as human beings are naturally great at being able to have somebody take a look at this beautiful thing that we're trying to give life to and say, it's kind of ugly. Just so you know, in case you were wondering, it's not the prettiest baby out there. Um, and 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 so, how do you train for that? You don't. You just have to be able to accept and respect that not everyone is going to see it for the same value that you do. But in that moment of realizing as much power as you might have over being able to bring this thing to life, there are things outside of your control. There are things outside of your power. That's being very vulnerable. And that's a tough lesson for anyone. I don't care if you're an entrepreneur or somebody that's an executive at a Fortune 100 company to learn from. Nobody trains you on how to be vulnerable and how to get up the next day and continue to do it. It just takes getting knocked down and being able to have that tenacity to get back up.
And I think that's why you hear people that are felons or went to jail and because they've hit that rock bottom and they've done that, maybe they're really good entrepreneurs, and we don't give them an opportunity. Who should I listen to as an entrepreneur if I have an issue? And when should I ask that person the question?
If we only knew the question to ask, we'd have it all figured out. That's always the harder part. The access to the information is out there, whether it's online or whether it's through a network or through a network of networks, you can get the information, but you do have to be very diligent and very vigilant in your own ability to continue to grow as an entrepreneur. I think entrepreneurs are innately curious. They're innately built to want to improve themselves. There's that competitive drive that typically lives in all of our central nervous system that gets us to wanting to go above and beyond where we were the day before, that allows us to lean into that. Whether or not it can become a prioritization often is how organized you can be as an entrepreneur, because some days, as I say, being janitor to CEO is not exactly a glamorous job, and there's never enough hours in the day to get it all done. So prioritizing that ability to set time aside for your strategic growth as an entrepreneur is critical. As far as who to ask, I think honestly, you need to lean into the operational expertise of people who have been there before you. I'm a big fan of learning from others because technically they are some of the best poised to be able to help overcome the challenges that you're facing and help you avoid the mistakes that they learned along the way. So finding mentors and systems of support from entrepreneurs, ideally who have recently graduated from those challenges. So don't go too far afield. I think one of the biggest mistakes I often see entrepreneurs do is they'll lean into like, my ideal mentor is, and I'm going to pick the typical sort of tech guru that a lot of people might lean into, like a Mark Benioff or Zuckerberg, and say that's my ideal mentor. And yet realistically, they're at such an early stage that they should be targeting somebody who's recently just gotten to scale or just recently overcome that first major change in a customer landscape that is getting them value on that front. And then sure, at some stage, if you get that ultimate conversation with that person, awesome. But there's so much more to be learned in the growth stages that you need to talk to people who have recently been there before that.
And not only from that standpoint, but also, and I love that point, but also when you're trying to be something that they are so far ahead of you with. So when people are like, oh, I want to be the next Facebook. Well, Facebook is now 14 years old.
Right.
With I don't even know how many thousands of employees, billions of dollars of worth. And you just have this little idea and can't even tell the person next to you.
Right.
You have to find those pieces. And I think mentorship is something that we live our life through. And so growing up, it's probably our mom or our dad, and then it's a teacher, then it's our sports coach, or if you played an instrument, it was someone who did that. And then we get into like this business world, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, and we forget about that.
Right.
And it's like, no, you still have those people that you're looking up to. And the people that you look up to the most and most often are those people that are just a little bit ahead of you. And then what I think is really hard for people to do is once they get above that person, to then not find that next level. So they'll know find someone. So for example, someone who's thinking about starting a business and someone who just started a business, then they get that business off the ground, it's doing better, but then they still hang out with this person who's still trying to figure it out and not go to that next person who's like, oh, I want to make a 6-figure business, a 7-figure business. And I think you have to consciously be changing that ladder to see your growth.
Absolutely. I encourage a lot of our entrepreneurs that are thinking about establishing anything informally on a mentorship side of the house, or more formally in an advisory board, to actually be diligent and write through sort of their job rec, and to talk about like how many hours a month are you committing? How many hours a month do you need them to be committing? How do you know what success looks like on a quarter and a semi-annual and an annual basis? And in the same way that you would meet with your team and say what's ahead for next year, you need to do that same process with your mentors and your advisors, whether formal or informal, so that each of you knows when it's time to pass the baton and move on to that next stage.
That's great. What's something about the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center that you want people to know about that they don't know about?
Well, we're just about to start and make available all of our resources online. So for people who physically can't get to the center in San Francisco, they can now still start pulling down the toolkits. They can pull down the lessons, the curriculum, the access, and the support in a digital fashion. I'm not going to pretend that it's the same as being in person, but nonetheless, I do think space is very rarely the issue. It's usually convening around other like-minded entrepreneurs. So I'm encouraging people across the globe to start thinking about, whether it's your local coffee shop, your home, and another amazing nonprofit organization that may be in your own backyard, to start gathering and utilizing resources in a more sustainable fashion, and to really try to continue to pull each other forward. Entrepreneurship really does take that village approach, and it can't be just siloed such that everybody comes into Silicon Valley. It doesn't work. So we need to do more to extend and support regions of innovation wherever they may be happening, pockets of entrepreneurs wherever they need that support. And so we're excited to be able to have this available in just 2 weeks' time. Everything will be online for people to start pulling down and using as guides in their own entrepreneurial development. And it's all pro bono. So the only thing that we ask in exchange is that they're going to continue to keep us posted on what they're working on, what they're struggling with, so that we can get better and more fine-tuned about the resources we're bringing to market.
Will they go to the center.nasdaq.org, or is it different?
They will, yes. Cool. It'll be that site. It'll just be switching over in a couple of weeks' time.
In your Startup America days, what were some communities that you visited that you thought could become the next big place? Or maybe even today?
Yeah, no, I mean, the one that I lament, like, why didn't I see it or understand it better as it was happening? And I would say it's probably maybe one of the greater success children that were born out of that is Miami. And I think, it started with a culture of determination that happened inside of the universities that said, we have unique talent here. They may not necessarily look and feel a lot like Silicon Valley talent, but they're creative. We have a unique understanding of the arts and of culture and of immigration and of differential policies that we want to really lean into to solve a lot of our immediate needs within the broader region. And in staying true to what their talent was able to own and be uniquely positioned around, all kinds of great startups were actually being fostered in those moments. And the capital started going to that region because it was kind of a no-brainer. They're like, look at all these great startups that are being born. So rather than in a contrarian fashion say, we are going to pick up and move capital to a market and then hope for the best, here was a reverse engineering situation that said, Miami going, we're just going to focus on the talent and we're going to worry about the capital later because the talent is clearly here. And if we show that there's really great businesses that are sustainable, that are uniquely set up for being entrepreneurial in style, we're going to have a place where capital is going to flock to. And that community certainly emerged. And I really love it because it is an inclusive engagement around what entrepreneurship looks like. Again, now Art Basel and everything else is sort of the alt South by Southwest premium program that people flock to, right, around what the creatives and entrepreneurships can look like. And now we would say, that has really become the cursory movement to entrepreneurship no longer is siloed inside of a university as being only relevant in business or engineering, that it's truly cross-campus engagement, that every person, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a graphic designer, whether you're a theater arts student, has the potential to be an entrepreneur in residence in that moment and to be capable and able to bring something to life in entrepreneurship. So to me, that's a great example of where it worked really well. I think an example where it's still a TBD a little bit, and again I would say I wish it wasn't this way, is kind of the RTC, the Raleigh Triangle area, because there was so much going around the ecosystem of support there. You had great labs, you had great universities, you had great capital that was being invested in by the region. And yet, the ability to keep that talent connected to that region has still been a work in progress. And I think they'd be the first to say that, whether it's the capital demand or whether it's more the talent demand, I think we underestimate how important it is that founders have like-minded founders that they can learn and lean into. And if some are leaving the area, it's very hard to keep the remaining founders engaged and motivated and supported with mentors and with others in those times. So.
A lot to think about. Closing thoughts. If someone was listening that was maybe on the fence about starting a business or didn't know what to do next, what would you say to them?
I would say that entrepreneurship is a constant focus and a constant battle of making sure it's the right fit for you. Really give it the time and the energy to find out if it is the right fit for you. Don't feel that there's one outcome that says you have to throw it all in and be a full-time entrepreneur, that there are many opportunities to explore entrepreneurship without having to give it the full-time gig engagement. Ask lots of questions of people who have been there before you, and make sure that you're surrounded with a support system in ways that can stand the test of tides for you too.
Love it. Nicola, I appreciate your time and, have that support system, find the people, and appreciate everything that you said.
Thank you so much, Zach. It's been fun.
Absolutely.